Okay, everyone, thank you so much for bearing with me. Today, we'll be discussing about funding opportunities that are basically beyond the SBIR and STTR programs or non-dilutive funding for your startups. My name is Maytel Weiss. I'm a Director of Business Development at the FreeMind Group, and I will be giving today's webinar. Before we begin, you can look at or basically get the slide deck from your handout section below. Everything we do, webinars, some other learning materials, and basically a lot of other very useful links could be found within the website, freemindconsultants.com. And let's begin. So basically, FreeMind has been around for about 18 years now, since 1999. We have 60 full-time employees and a very diverse client base. Academics, big universities, medical centers, and research institutes, and of course the industry. Small startups all the way up to some of the big names, and everything in the middle, obviously. We submit around 500 applications in government contracts and grants every year, and help our clients win about $100 million in awards every year. And today I would like to address a very common misconception, unfortunately. Basically, we hear a lot that when people think about non-dilutive funding for small businesses, for-profits or organizations, they immediately think about the SBIR and the STTR programs. And again, they are wonderful programs. You're not going to hear a single bad thing from me or us regarding these programs. But the message that I would like to get across today is that there's definitely a lot more out there besides the SBIR program. So if we'll zoom out and take a look at the $50 billion pool that we target here at FreeMind, first of all, the most important element or the most important agency is the NIH. Basically, we're talking about 27 institutes and centers, including the NCI, National Cancer Institute, NIDDK, National Institute of Diabetes, and Digestive and Kidney Diseases. Just a few examples. I'm not going to read all the acronyms here, but the NIBIB, the National Institute of Bioengineering and Bioimaging, National Eye Institute, National Institute on Aging, and the list goes on and on. Other HSS organizations include Barda, the Biomedical Research and Development Authority, the FDA and the CDC, that I'm sure you know, the National Science Foundation, the NSF, Department of Defense, the DoD, and within the DoD we can find the U.S. Army, DARPA, DTRA, CDMRP, etc., and of course private foundations. Just to name a few: the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and many more. And the great thing about these sources of funding is that we definitely see that they support all stages of development. Basically everything from discovery all the way up to licensing, past the phase 3 even. And if we were to take apart that very wide spectrum, I would like to divide it into 3. So the first part is preclinical work. We can name the R21, SBIR phase 1, NSF, some DoD mechanisms. And when we're talking about very early stage programs, you can usually anticipate about $200,000 to $500,000 per award. More advanced stages, still preclinical or early stage clinical, usually the projects are usually defined by award sizes of $500,000 to about $3.5 million, and include some NIH mechanisms, SBIR phase 2s, NSFs, of course, definitely the DoD. And if we'll move up to late stage programs, clinical stage programs, and we'll definitely go into that in a bit, the awards can range and get all the way up to hundreds of millions of dollars. And these amounts are definitely there. It's just, not just us being optimistic. And another way to look at it is well, if you'll take a look at the spectrum again, another interesting thing to think about is the number of applications or opportunities out there and success rates that definitely change. So if we're talking about early stage programs, we'll definitely find a lot more opportunities in terms of the number of different applications that you can submit, but the success rates are a bit lower if you compare to what we see at a later stage. So there aren't as many opportunities, but the success rates are much higher. And the trick here is to definitely make sure that you're matching the right opportunity to what you look to fund. If we'll zoom in to the NIH budget for 2017, it's a little over $34 billion. But the most interesting part of that pie chart is that most of that, about $28 billion, goes out to fund extramural research, meaning these are the funds that are available for research groups, organizations, universities, of course, but basically people out there that do excellent work and excellent research. So that's definitely something to bear in mind. And if we'll zoom into the NIH website, and that $28 billion, definitely we can look at the different categories or different indications that are funded. So oncology is definitely right up there, $6 billion. A lot of work with neurosciences, another about $6 billion, infectious diseases. But the main take-home message here is that their scope is incredibly wide, and probably any research project and any topic that you can imagine will probably be funded by the NIH. Another very interesting fact regarding non-dilutive funding is that typically for every dollar won through these types of funding, a company is most likely to have $8.38 from the private sector in the future, making basically awards from non-dilutive funding or money won through non-dilutive funding a very good indication of your likelihood to succeed. And just to add on to that, historically, 50% of all FDA-approved drugs received government funding at some point during the course of their R&D. So when investors look at companies and think about companies that have a strong likelihood of success, having a government fund is definitely something that is helpful. So let's dive into that. When we're talking about different submission types or funding routes, we can roughly divide it into three. So the first one is solicited applications. Basically, when you find an opportunity that addresses a specific unmet need that you're working on. So for example, you can find specific opportunities for diabetes, oncology, and whatnot. Second type of route is unsolicited opportunities or investigator-initiated opportunities. Just to name a few, we have the R21, the R1s, a lot of SBIR and STTRs. And the most important thing when you're going after one of these opportunities is to make sure that you're establishing the interest of the institute even before you're submitting. So definitely talk to program officers, get their feedback, and make sure that you're, simply put, not wasting your time before you know that this is something that they would like to fund. But the idea here is for you to pitch your idea to the funding institute and hope for the best. And the third type is broad agency announcements, or BAAs. These are large-scale solicitations that basically address a wider area of research. These are very common if we look at the DoD type of opportunities, Barda, of course. And I would like to focus on the National Institute of Health, at least at the beginning. So if you'll go into the NIH website and you'll look up funding opportunities, you'll find a little over 1,000. And just, click search. You can definitely look up the specific topic that you're targeting, but bear in mind that usually around 60 to 70% of all funds allocated by the NIH are awarded through the unsolicited mechanisms that we mentioned. So we're talking about a handful of applications that definitely account for most of the funds that are awarded. So please don't disregard the parent solicitations, the parent announcements. And I have a few examples. So first of all, the parent announcement or the omnibus solicitations. There are a lot of SBIR and STTRs that are out there, but the most, I guess the most important ones are the omnibus solicitations. I know I said that I'm not going to talk about the SBIR and STTR today, but they are definitely a big and important part of the funding landscape. So they are worth mentioning. So the SBIR, basically the Small Business Innovative Research Grant, it is there, and if we're talking about the early stages, so usually it's around $150,000, and that can also be extended. Again, not going into that. And another example is the STTR. So, for example, we're talking about the phase 2 STTR. It can be about $1 million in direct cost, and again, there is an extension of that as well that can add an additional 50% onto that. Two very important mechanisms are the R21 and the R01. So the R21 is for relatively early stage research. You can ask for up to $275,000 in direct costs for up to 2 years, and you can add on to that indirect costs as well. And that is very helpful. Typically, it's about 40% average on top of the $275,000 for the R21. The R01 is the research project grant, and that's for more advanced stages. Again, you can definitely submit an R01 for preclinical work, but you have to make sure that you're able to establish a project that will be 5 years long. Of course, it can be less than that, but it's usually about 5 years long. And you can ask for $500,000 every year for up to 5 years, so totaling at $2.5 million. And of course, add on to that the indirect cost factor as well. These are, I wanted you to see the solicitations themselves. So this is the parent R01. You see the solicitation number. The next deadline is October 16th. And this is the R01. Again, these are all the institutes that participate. The reason that I added that part of the solicitation, that of course is very valuable. Please read the entire solicitation before submitting. You don't want to get stuck on technicality. But the reason I chose this part of the solicitation is to show you how many institutes participate in the parent R01. It is a great mechanism. Definitely for most indications, this is definitely a good way to go. And if we'll zoom into the clinical stage funding mechanisms, I would like to name a few. First of all, we have the phase 2 or the fast track SBIRs. Their code is R44 or U44. The R1 that we talked about before. Another thing that's very important, and I think it's a unique and wonderful mechanism within the NIH, is the clinical trial planning grant, the U34 or the R34. And bear in mind that the great motivation of the NIH is to help you complete the work that you're planning. So definitely they would like to fund you. And in order to do that, they will even help you fund the work that you need to do before you start the clinical trial itself. So definitely, if that is what you're planning on doing, start with a planning grant. It makes it easy for them to fund you later on. and it helps you, of course, be funded when we're talking about larger scale projects. So another very important mechanism is the UO1, which is the big clinical stage program. These are uncapped, meaning you have to justify the amount that you're requesting, but they don't want to limit you. Another mechanism is the phase cooperative agreement, or the UH2, UH3. This is a phase program as well. Please, of course, look it up before starting. And another type of clinical stage funding mechanism, and this is not NIH, it's the broad agency announcements that, again, are definitely a very important source of funding for clinical stage programs. Okay, so when applying for a clinical stage program, there are a few requirements and recommendations. First of all, a clinical protocol is usually a necessity because, you know, the way to get them to fund you is to help them see that you know what you'll be doing with the award. So having a clinical protocol will definitely be very helpful. An investigator's brochure is definitely recommended, not a must, but it is helpful. If you have a list of the clinical sites, the site PIs, and basically everyone else who will be taking part in the project from outside the company, that is a tremendous help. And the next thing is an IND. So this used to be a recommendation, but from what we see within the last year or so, it's now a must. So make sure that before you're applying to a clinical stage program, you have an IND. I can't even emphasize this enough. Have an IND before submitting a clinical stage program. Of course, if you want to be awarded, it's definitely something you need. Having an IRB is also useful, but it's not something that you need to have at the time of submission itself. And most importantly, make sure to contact the program officer in advance. For some programs, it's definitely very helpful and it will increase your chances, but for some, the application will not be accepted if a program officer did not give you their okay before you've started. So to summarize the NIH review process, I know we're talking about science-based projects, but the review process is not a scientific review process per se. It's more of a risk assessment process. Basically, they have to compare the risk in funding you, and we're talking about a few $1 million. Of course, they want to make sure that it goes, that you are putting it to use. But the strength of the application has to be more important or more present than the risk itself. And the way they do that is through a 5 review criteria process. So the first one, the most important one, is the scientific approach. What will you do with the award? You have to talk about the specific aims. You have to talk about the different type of experiments. How will you make sure that you are on track? You have to make sure that you're explaining what is the significance of the work that you're proposing. Of course, curing cancer is very important, but you have to explain the specific unmet need. Another thing that's very important is to make sure that you're addressing the problem in a very new, exciting, innovating way. That's another very important criteria because they do want to fund exciting science. And you have to make sure that you are showing them that the work that you're about to do is exactly that. The fourth one is the leadership. Who will be helping that project through? Who will be leading the scientific team? They need to make sure that they do trust the person in charge. And the last one is environment. Where will this project take place? So if you're, just as an example, suggesting a microscopy-based project and you do not have a microscope, that might not be a very good environment for you to run the work that you're suggesting. So make sure that if you're talking about some kind of equipment, you have that equipment. If you're talking about a project that will require lab space, have that lab space. You don't need to actually own it now, but you need to talk about where you'll be doing the work. So if you're a very small company and you're outsourcing a lot of the work, and you have a CRO that you usually work with, that's fine. Make sure that you're talking about the fact that the work will be done at this and that lab, and that you're able to describe it. So that's about that. Another important source of funding is Barda, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. Basically, let's just come back to that scary slide. So if we look at the entire spectrum, Barda usually steps in at a late stage. So we're talking clinical stage funding. You can see the purple part of the scheme. So usually they're here to help you breach through the valley of death. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3 trials. Their budget for 2017 is $920 million. Nothing to shake a stick at. I'm sure you'll agree. And basically, the mission of Barda is to help you develop and produce medical countermeasures that address chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear agents. And they have 3 open solicitations at this time. So the first one is basically development of medical countermeasures for pandemic influenza. And I've listed the BAA's number. You can just Google it if you find it relevant. The second one is a more general one for chemical, biological, etc. countermeasures. And the last one is for medical devices or platforms, or basically technology-based projects. So these are the three open solicitations. And another thing to bear in mind is that the review process within Barda is not exactly identical to what you see with the NIH. It's actually divided into 2. The first stage is called the pre-application stage, or a white paper, where you basically submit a very short summary to Barda entailing a bit about what you plan on doing. The second stage, of course, it's then reviewed, and then only if they're interested, you're invited to submit the full application. Once you've handed that in, it is reviewed again and then hopefully awarded. But I would like to focus a bit about the first stage, the white paper stage. So this is the first and one of the most important steps as you've submitted. It's typically about 2 pages long, and the majority of applications do not make it past the white paper stage. Basically, what this means is that if you are called to submit a full application, your chances increase dramatically. And that is exactly why you have to craft your white paper very, very carefully. Make sure that the science is very well presented and represented and meets the guidelines and the specification of the solicitation. I cannot emphasize enough how critical this stage is. Another thing to talk about is the Department of Defense. Within the Department of Defense, there are a few different mechanisms that we'll very briefly talk about. So we have DARPA, we have DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency. We have USAMRAC, which is the U.S. Army Medical Research and Material Command. And definitely their budget is something to look to. Another thing is the FDA. The FDA has a great orphan drug program. Basically, the idea is that they help you fund clinical stage work, so phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, for rare diseases or conditions. If you have an indication that is an orphan indication, definitely think about the FDA. The next deadline is in February 2018. It's a once-a-year program. And One very important program that I would like to focus on a bit is the CDMRPs. These are the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs. Again, CDMRPs. They come out once a year, and they address a pretty robust group of indications. And it's not very well known, unfortunately, but they do not only fund combat-related indications, they also take care of veterans and their family members. So just as an example, they have a breast cancer program, and I just, I zoomed in a bit on the phase 3 and phase 4 of the programs. So phase 3 is about $4 million, and you can add on to that indirect costs. Level 4 is about $10 million, and of course indirect costs as well. And you can look at the scope a bit, but basically they fund everything from very early stage projects all the way up to very advanced projects as well. And this is a very short list, or some of the indications that are funded by the CDMRP for 2017. So breast cancer, about $120 million. They had a pretty long list from general medical research, about 300 million, prostate cancer, 90 million, spinal cord injury, another 30 million, vision, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and this is the entire list. But bear in mind that, for example, we talked about the general medical research. So these are the topics for that. I'm definitely not going to go into all of that, but what I would like to show you here is how diverse their interests are. So definitely, they do a lot of work, and I mean, again, you'll be surprised at how specific they can be. The deadline is unfortunately passed for 2017, but definitely wait for the 2018 announcements. And some of the topics definitely stay the same, some of them change, of course, depending on Congress. So that's regarding the CDMRPs. And another thing, and let me just zoom out for a bit. Another thing to remember as you approach non-dilutive funding is that, of course, although it is definitely a great source of funding, it has to be a part of a very balanced campaign. So definitely go after angel foundations, look at the public market as well, look to VCs, but you can't really disregard non-dilutive funding within that context. And when you are looking at non-dilutive funding and you are trying to maximize your chances with that, there are a few things that are important. So first of all, you have to seek insight into the interests and goals of the funding agencies themselves. Talk to program officers, read the solicitation. I know I said that about 3-4 times by now, but again, read the solicitation. It's so important. Make sure that you do understand what they want, what they look to fund. Secondly, of course, correlate the granting strategy with your long-term R&D plan. If you've opened a solicitation and you see that they are very much interested in diabetes, but you work on infectious diseases, it doesn't make a lot of sense to submit something that you don't really think you'll be able to see through. First of all, I mean, you won't be able to use the money if you're not basically executing your plan. And secondly, if you will find something that is suitable to your needs and you'll submit again, it might not look very good to the reviewers if they'll be able to track your history with them. Before you begin and before you've even picked up the pen, a very important thing to do is to identify all of the relevant funding opportunities. You want to make sure that you are devoting your time to the most important and the most accurate solicitation that meets your needs. And plan and execute a long-term multi-submission granting strategy. We definitely strong believers in the multi-submission approach here. First of all, remember that the time from submission to award is usually around 8 months. Of course, there are stops along the way. The application is usually reviewed within about 4 months from submission. You're able to see the reviewer's comments. You're able to see your impact score. And that usually gives you a pretty good indication of what happens. But again, from submission to first funds becoming available, we're talking 8 months. So definitely, it is important to understand that this is something that you have to plan towards. It's not an ATM just yet, maybe one day, but we're very far from that now. And another thing that's important is to execute a multi-submission granting strategy. Definitely, you can submit one grant, cross your fingers, hope for the best, but that's not really a strategy. I'm sure if any of you went to a VC and tried to get funding from there, no one took just one meeting and then continued on. You have to do this very systematically. And in order to maximize your chances of award, you have to know your weaknesses. You have to find the right partners if necessary. A common misconception is that if you're bringing onto your team members from outside the company, it might make you look weak as an applicant. That is entirely wrong. Understanding that you need someone else to basically complete your expertise within the team is actually a sign of strength. Of course, if you have everything you need in-house, that's amazing. But if you're planning a kidney-based program and you don't have a kidney expert, you need one to make sure that the application comes across as something that the NIH should invest, something that they can anticipate will bring results. You have to know the interests of the funding agency and the mechanism, of course. For example, if they're looking to fund clinical projects that require multi-center coordinations and you only have one, that's probably not a good fit. So make sure that you do understand that before even picking up the pen. You have to address the non-important admin parts. I know that they are sometimes considered as not important, but they are critical. The worst thing that can happen, and trust me on this, is for you to spend 3 months working on an application, completing it, submitting it, and then having it disqualified because of something that you forgot in terms of administration. Definitely, there are a lot of deadlines throughout the year, but it is awful. Make sure that you understand what you need in terms of the administrative aspects of the application. And I know I sound like a broken record, but please read the solicitation. And another thing is to make sure that you are or you have established yourself as a top researcher as well as an experienced manager. So definitely, this is a scientific project. They're looking to fund scientific work, but they're also very, very keen on making sure that the person running the project itself is able to see it through in terms of managing the moving parts within the project. From very small projects that just require a CRO or some kind of academic collaborator to big clinical programs that require 50 centers in 3 continents. But you have to make sure that the person leading the team is capable. So make sure that you are thinking about that as well. And as you do that, you also have to remember that you have to reduce the risk of being selected for funding. So definitely make sure that you are thinking about all of that as well. And in order to maximize your funding potential, basically in FreeMind, we help you identify all the relevant funding opportunities. Again, even before picking up the pen, you have to make sure that you do know everything there is out there. The second thing we do, once we do understand everything that's relevant for you, you have to create a multi-submission granting strategy. If you see that there are 7 opportunities that are relevant to you, you have to say, okay, if I'll start off with this, I can then do that deadline. It's in about 3 months. I have time after that. For example, this is August. I do hope that some of you are vacationing, but obviously you won't commit to a grant that's due September 1st if you don't have time to work on it. So this is definitely something to bear in mind as you plan your long-term approach. And of course, submitting as many top quality applications as possible. An application needs to be very well crafted, it needs to be good, and it needs to be competitive. Bear in mind that there is a very strong competitive nature of these funding sources. It's not something to disregard. And this is what we have today. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to see our YouTube, other presentations on YouTube. Of course, we also have a LinkedIn account, Twitter account, Facebook account, I think. And so a few things just before I wrap this out. The slide deck is available within the webinar sidebar. You have the handouts, everything's there. I am sending out the link to the next webinar in case you've enjoyed yourself and would like to have some more. The next webinar will be about the CNS and PNS related R&D funding mechanisms. So the link was just sent. Of course, you can also log into our website and register from there. You don't have to do it now. And thank you very much. Let me see if there are some questions. Okay, so I have a question regarding non-US entities that would like to submit. So unlike the SBIR and STTR programs, a lot of these programs are also open for non-US applicants as well. And bear in mind that if for some reason you do not qualify as an SBIR applicant, whether it's because the company is too big, you're doing some of the work outside of the US, you're doing none of the work in the US, all of that is definitely open. Of course, read the solicitation. So that's that. If you're looking and you would like to know about non-US applicants, you can just look up foreign, and then you'll be able to find that part. Let's see what else. So for clinical planning award, can clinical study approvals outside the US be accepted instead of an IND? That's a very good question. Generally speaking, every agency has their own different requests when we're talking about clinical stage projects. Make sure that you contact the program officer before submitting, because some of these solicitations, and they do make a great effort to update them. Again, make sure that it is really okay and not just okay within the guidelines. Sometimes it makes better sense to complete the IND and submit towards the next deadline, and not just submit for this deadline and be a disregard because you do not have the IND yet. I hope that answers your question. In your experience, can a virtual company obtain a government grant? Absolutely. We have clients that were in, absolutely virtual. They only did the planning part in-house, but if it's a part of your business model and it makes sense for the project, absolutely. Don't think that just because the company is virtual or early stage, it means that it will not be awarded by the NIH, by the DoD, by the funding agencies that I mentioned. The worst thing you can do is give up before you look into it at all, because you don't think that you qualify. So that is all I have for now. Of course, feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions. Thank you very much.